Welcome to today's webinar, The Connected Healthcare Payer. My name is Eric Willis, Executive Vice President from CuraWorks, and today I'm joined by John Swisher, our Director of Solution Development. As you heard as you joined today's webinar, the lines are muted, but as you have questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to use the question and answer section on the right-hand panel of your GoToWebinar or the chat session as well, and we'll address those questions at the end of today's webinar. So the focus of the webinar today will really be talking about the impact of content services across a healthcare payer organization. But before we jump into the meat of the presentation, you might be thinking to yourself, well, who are these CuraWorks guys, right? I may not be a current customer, you may not have heard about us. So CuraWorks, we're a system integrator leveraging the industry's leading content services platform as recognized by both Gartner and Forrester, the product being OnBase. So we take the content services platform of OnBase and we use that platform to accelerate your digital transformation goals by bringing to market our portfolio of solution accelerators built specifically for the healthcare payer industry. So as we go into today's webinar, we'll be talking about, again, the impact of content services across a healthcare payer organization. We'll also then at the end be having John join us to demonstrate and visualize what the impact of that technology does to the organization. So let's first take a look at an example company. So here we have Cura Health, right? We've got our fictitious healthcare payer. And when we look at healthcare payer organizations, we really look at 5 distinct areas where the impact of content services and digital transformation can be felt. So first we see network management, claims or claims management, care or medical management, member services, and finally, sales and marketing. And when you look at the screen right now, you see 5 distinct segments of that wheel, right? But I think as we've seen throughout the years of consulting in the healthcare payer space, and I'm sure each and every one of you from a healthcare payer organization realize that all of these departments don't operate on their own. They're all very connected to each other, and there's overlap between each and every single one of those departments. Whether it's within network management, working with claims as it relates to disputes or reimbursements relating to their claims associated to those providers, whether it's on care management, where potentially, again, going back to a dispute or a claim, leveraging appeals and grievances. But also to that same vein, as we talk about grievances within the world of care management, how that connects back to member services. When member services, that team getting that initial call in from a member frustrated with a visit they just had with their provider. Or at the end of the day, why all these exist is through sales and marketing, right? Bringing new members to the organization, bringing on new groups, etc. So being connected to member services and ensuring a positive member experience and provider experience to grow that health plan. But when we look at all of these different segments of a healthcare payer and the interconnected nature of them, the piece that we continually go back to is that all of these business processes and all these departments are connected by people. There are people within your organizations that are working with each other across departments, across segments of your business to improve that member experience and improve that member experience. So not only are those people connected because they're part of your organization, but they're connected by the content managed within the walls of your organization. Whether that's clinical information, whether it's information from a provider, from a member, whether it's content you're generating as part of letter generation and correspondence going out to your membership. But that content is just one thing, whether it's paper, whether it's digital, etc. The other key component of it is also the data associated to it, right? The first step is the data that's tied to that content, and that's information valuable to the health plan, but it's also that interconnected data across the different departments. whether it's data in one system that needs to get passed over to another, whether it's data that needs to get shared based off of a transaction that needs to be reviewed by another department, etc. Now, once we look at that content and we look at that data, both of those elements are combined to the processes that we manage within the organization. And when we look at that, that's where OnBase comes into play. That's where that content services platform and that enterprise information management solution comes in to manage information in your healthcare payer organization, regardless if I'm in network management or care management or sales and marketing. I've got one single place that allows me to access information about my organization, whether I'm in member services looking at a member record, but also being able to access that same exact content when I'm potentially working with them for disease management or potentially a claims dispute, etc. OnBase is that glue that brings together all of those people in the organization, all of those processes, all of that document, and all of that data. So when we look at OnBase and look at the world of content services, we really try to break it down into 6 distinct areas. The first one is capture, really bringing that information into this centralized information platform. Then looking at how we're storing that information. Once we're doing that, how we're accessing it, how we're integrating it into other applications across our organization. Managing all of that information. So as we talked about, now that I've got this content, now that I've got this data, now that it's integrated with my core systems like Facets and TrueCare and Salesforce, how am I managing all of this information? And at the end of the day, how am I leveraging all of this processing and content and data to predict and have analytics about the health and the future of my health plan and my healthcare payer organization? So if we first look at capture, right, because it's a really critical component. If we're not capturing this information and bringing it into the system, well, we don't have information to share across the organization and to drive that digital transformation. And that really hits all aspects from a capture standpoint, whether that's paper content, because yes, as we all know, unfortunately, there is still paper content coming in the doors of our organization. We still have a mail room that's getting mail. We're still having our senior members, our Medicare members, submitting everything on paper, on letters, right? We still have to deal with that challenging unstructured content. That also may be, if you're a large health organization, how you're handling content coming in from remote offices. Maybe you still have stuff in offsite storage that needs to be digitized and brought in to be able to be shared across the organization. Maybe it's in member services where I'm getting a phone call. I need to capture that information coming in the call because it's related to other transactions downstream. But if we look at it more from a digital standpoint, that may be content and capturing content related to information stored within your other applications. As I mentioned earlier, maybe I'm on a screen in Facets and I need to be able to pull that member data or that claim data off of that screen to pull and capture it as I bring in maybe that claims exception process I'm managing. But also could be looking at data streams coming from those core systems or from outside sources. Maybe you have a centralized data warehouse. But then as mobile begins to be used, even not just by our younger members, but also even our senior members, right? The ability to have the access to fill out forms electronically, to access my case information electronically, the ability to go and capture information from my mobile device. You know, the way we like to think about it is that now with a mobile phone, almost everyone has a scanner in their pocket. So that provider can capture information from their office. Members can capture information at their home and send it in for processing into the organization. Whether that's email or fax for email integrations, and be able to bring in email content to trigger cases or to populate information. And then finally, file shares, where we may still have a lot of information stored that we have the ability through enterprise search to search those file shares, find information, and bring those into a centralized content system to manage in a single platform. You might be thinking to yourself, right? Well, Eric, I have the ability inside of Salesforce to attach documents. I have the ability inside of Facets to use legacy document management components to attach things. I have inside my care management system, I have the ability to store all my clinical content. Why would I want to go start putting this all into one single place? Well, the answer is that people don't just need it inside of those single applications. They need it to be accessible across the organization. That medical record that you requested from a provider may be needed by 3 other departments to make a decision. Instead of having to have them all get access to that care management system or to email that around or share it around, you can centrally capture that and store that and serve that information up directly from a content services platform. The other key element of that is that when you manage it centrally and you take an enterprise approach to digital transformation, you have the ability within inside of the worlds of, for example, OnBase here, to build a wall around that critical sensitive information and ensure that we're protecting the value of that data. A lot of the information you bring is going to have patient information and medical information on it that cannot be shared. So if you think of it from like a security standpoint, what's stopping someone from Salesforce if you give them the ability to go to a transactional record in Salesforce, click attach file, and upload any file to that record? Yes, maybe I'm restricting who has access to that record within inside of the Salesforce, but I'm not putting any controls in place of what they're uploading, and then anyone who has access can see that, right? So what we like to take a look at is serving the right content to the right people at the right time with the appropriate rights. And then finally, it's great that we have encryption, that we're storing this correctly, that we're only allowing the right people to see it. But also much more important at times is to look at, well, how is this being managed? Am I keeping this content for the right amount of time in my organization? Am I disposing at the right amount of time? So that when I do have some legal discovery, I don't have documents sitting around that could potentially be, open up liability because I still have it in our system. So it's really taking that holistic view as you go through your digital transformation journey and how I'm centrally not just capturing, but storing and managing that information. Well, now that we've done that, and John's going to show a little bit of this from an access standpoint of, well, how can I access all this information? And we look at it in a number of different ways. This day and age, everyone wants it the way they want it, right? I want it personalized. I want it how I want to look at it. So we have the ability to serve that content to users based off of what line of business they're in within your organization, what department, what role, maybe their preference within that role, so that we're giving them the content in a way that they can use it to make a decision faster and improve that member and provider experience within the health plan. A key piece that I'll keep talking about throughout this presentation is integration. It is one of the most critical pieces here, because now that I've stored this information, the last thing you want to do is start to have to train people on a new application like OnBase or other content services platforms. You want to keep them in that core system that they use day in and day out, and now just serve that information up to them through that application and allow them to now access that shareable content directly from the system they use every day. As I talked about mobile, right? The ability to access this content from your mobile device. So anytime, anywhere, the ability to retrieve that information. Maybe it's also looking at it from an offline standpoint. So, think of this more from an enrollment scenario where I'm out in the field, I'm meeting with folks in remote areas where they may not have a strong internet connection. I still want to be able to access that electronic enrollment form. I want to be able to capture signatures on that enrollment form remotely. I want to be able to capture the information while I'm disconnected. Then when I'm back in the office, be able to load that information in the system and be able to continue that transaction. And then finally, from an extended standpoint, now that I've captured all this information, I have the ability to share it with my members through maybe member portals or providers through provider portals, so that we can provide more of a self-service environment by centrally managing that information. Why I keep talking about the centralization component of this is because it's critical when you're thinking about digital transformation in your company, right? Because every single place that you store that content is another place you have to figure out how I'm going to integrate it with to get that information out to our members, providers, other departments. By managing in one single place, it allows you to facilitate and accelerate that digital transformation because you have one single place to integrate with, one single application to manage, one single platform to upgrade, to maintain, etc. As I talked about a little bit ago, integration is key. It's probably one of the biggest things we see from a value perspective when we look at content services and healthcare payers, right? When we talked at the beginning here, I talked about those 5 different departments. I talked about them all being connected with each other. Well, that connection, another word for that connection is integration, right? Those departments are integrated with each other, sharing information with each other, sharing data, sharing processes. So integration is critical as you go through your planning phases and think through how you're going to implement digital transformation or content services. That may be on the left-hand side there, we're using integration tools to do either data level, bidirectional integrations, screen level integrations, which I'll show in a second, but also using some of our purpose-built integrations. You know, maybe some of you today, I know a few folks on the line I looked at, I know you guys use Workday, right? So you leveraging Workday as your integration and using that pre-built integration piece that we have from an on-base perspective. But it could also be productivity tools like integration with Outlook, with Office, etc. From a healthcare payer perspective, the areas that we really see a lot in our engagements with customers is across the TriZetto ecosystem or Cognizant ecosystem, whether it's Facets, whether it's Care Advance, etc., but also more modern applications like Health Edge, or on the clinical side with TrueCare from CaseNet. And then the one we keep seeing more and more and more is Salesforce. From a Salesforce perspective, we're starting to see more and more customers leverage Salesforce for member services, provider services, but also customers starting to leverage Salesforce as it relates to the clinical and health insurance data model. And thinking through, well, if I'm investing in Salesforce, how do I, integrate that with content services? And the piece I want you to think about with all of these is that you should never be looking at a product like OnBase or other content services platforms on how to potentially replace these applications I have on the screen. Your digital transformation strategy is how to complement those and how to fill the gaps, right? TriZetto, Health Edge, CaseNet, TrueCare, et cetera. These solutions are designed to do something very specific, and in most cases, they do it really well, but they don't fill the whole complete pie, right? There's pieces open that need to be filled, and that's where OnBase comes in, or other products like OnBase. The ability to look at it and say, hey, I have this exceptions process. I need to manage that exceptions process that occurred as part of my claims management and be able to manage that like a case and manage the interactions as it relates to that dispute. Maybe it's that my workflow process, gets me 8% of the way. I need OnBase to fill that 10%. Maybe it's, hey, I have no ability to access images. I have to go to a different place. I want to now be able to access images from that system. So think of it much more as how we're complementing those technologies and how it helps you drive more value out of that investment. A great use case is within Facets, where here we're using more of our synthetic API as a way to have a widget displayed on the screen that is continuously looking at the screen, seeing where a user's at, saying in this case, oh, I've got 3 documents tied to Michael Scott on this screen. And if you click on that, I can see those 3 documents. I can see that I'm missing some critical documents that I'm supposed to see. And just with a click of the mouse, I could click on one of those documents and view that information right there within inside of Facets. I never had to go into OnBase. I never had to learn what OnBase was. I now just have this great widget sitting on top of the screen that allows me to see, regardless of what application I'm on, what content is available. Before I jump into measurement and hand this over to John, before I jump into management and hand this over to John, the one last thing I want to look at was measure. I think it's one of the most critical pieces from a content services standpoint, and John will spend some time on it. We really look at this in 4 distinct areas. We look at it from a regulatory perspective. I know a lot of the folks on the line today fall into the Medicare and Medicaid space. So John today is going to touch on a little bit of how we handle some of that regulatory reporting out of the box, right? And leverage all of the content and data that's created as part of managing these processes to be able to automatically populate those reports. I think an example today may be populating your ODAG and CDAG universes and allowing the process to drive that information. It's also then looking at dashboards, real-time information to see the health of your business process. But then it's going one step further with those dashboards and starting to use the data behind the data to start improving your organization. we started to see this a lot with our customers where they're traditionally in a very, cost-centered department. Great examples, appeals and grievances. At the end of the day, I'm usually overturning stuff to pay out claims and pay more business. It's not a revenue generator for the health plan, right? I gotta do it well, so I keep my stars ratings up, and I'm successful. And I don't have any, audits and issues from CMS. But at the same time, it's tough to justify technology spend in that area. Well, one of the things that payers have to start realizing is that the data created by managing those processes provides insights into other areas of the organization. You may see where I've got a large uptick of a particular grievance type and realize that maybe I can do some root cause analysis and determine that I have an issue with provider training. And if we were just to address that, have our provider services team out and address that, maybe send out information to our providers, we could reduce the amount of grievances tied to that category. Or maybe it's a quality of care situation, right? And I can say I have a specific provider who is just not providing quality care to our members. And during the recontracting process, I can take that into account based off of that information that was derived from my business process. And then finally, the ability to do auditing across the entire system, whether that's audits from an internal audit perspective, but it's also technology audits of looking at timestamps and data elements of when and what has happened in each and single element of the system. So finally, and probably most importantly, as I tee it up for John to give his demonstrations, we look at manage, right? Now that I've captured this content, I'm storing it in a secure way, I'm being able to access that information from anywhere, offline, mobile, integrated with my other applications. I now have the ability to manage all of that information, whether that's managing of that content, right? The ability to tie that content to a business process or potentially create content. We know that a big part of healthcare payers is generating a lot of outbound correspondence and a lot of outbound information to your members and providers. So it's managing that inbound and outbound from a content perspective. But it's also then managing the data tied to that content and the data tied to that process, but even at times bringing in data from outside sources within other applications to be managed inside of OnBase. And then finally, managing that process holistically, where I can manage the content, the data, and the process together to give my users a 360-degree view of that transaction. So if we go back and look at those 5 segments, right? I've got my 5 here on the screen. There are a plethora of solutions that can be deployed through content services in each of these areas and augment different parts of your business. But John's going to spend some time going through just a few areas today. But if we look at network management at first here, one of the areas that John's going to touch on is within network development and contracting, where we're not just talking about provider contracting. A lot of people handle that and handle it well, but they forget the other 2 parts of it, right? They forget the whole recruitment side on the front end, where I'm going out and trying to build out new business in a new state or fill a deficiency in a particular market. But then also the onboarding piece. Well, I've signed that contract. Well, how do I actually get this provider onboarded into all of my systems and bring them into network? But then it's other solutions like provider credentialing, provider outreach, so doing outbound attestations and managing those campaigns, doing site surveys, so going out and maybe there was a grievance that caused us to go out and our provider services team to do a site visit and walk through the provider's facilities. Or maybe during the contracting process or credentialing process, we triggered that. But then also looking at it more holistically from a performance management standpoint of how are these providers performing and using that data that's generated in these different areas to push that information into OnBase. And then finally, from a care management standpoint, John's going to spend some time here as well. And we look at this area, we spend a lot of time in the appeals and grievances world. It's one of those areas that a lot of vendors just don't spend a lot of time in because it's ridiculously complex if you've spent some time there. There's so many different if-then situations based off of regulations, the amount of content that's created, the amount of reports required. But that's a perfect area for content services to succeed. And we have solutions broken down by those distinct needs within Medicare, Medicaid, and commercial lines of business. But then also looking at other areas within care management like organization determinations, prior authorization, clinical assessments, etc. So I know I spent a lot of time and went through that pretty fast, but I really want to lay a groundwork for where we view the impact of content services in a healthcare payer organization. And now I'm going to turn it over to John to spend the next 30 minutes or so showing you guys what this really means and allow you to be able to see the impact of some of this technology. And a lot of times I know seeing is believing. So with that, I'll pass it over to John to share with you guys a little bit of this technology.
Perfect. So let's get right into some of that reporting that Eric was talking about. So whether it's a concept of regulatory reporting or dashboards or providing insight into your process or your current inventory, or could be for an audit. Right, so let's look at the appeals and grievances solution in this example and get an insight into our current inventory, but also our processing. So if we look through here, one of the things we want to make sure whenever possible when we think about insight into our process in these dashboards is in making them as functional as possible and making them interactive. So if you look across the top here, we have different classifications with some simple pie charts that say, hey, what type of case is this? What type of priority are we doing? Is this for a claim or for an authorization? And as we click into any single one of those, the dashboard is going to update for us. So if I click on that grievance portion, it's gonna update that dashboard and let me know, okay, out of those 13 previous that were due today, holistically, 8 of those are grievances. But more importantly, how many are due in the next 72 hours so we can make sure that we're planned and allocated, but then also what's our standard or average age to completion for each one of those. So we're trending at just under 21 days for all of our grievances. Now, if I were to take that one step further and say, hey, the majority of these are going to be processed under a standard time frame, but let's take a look at, about 7% of these that are processed expedited. And as soon as I click on that section of the pie, again, we're updating based off of our folks that are managing those cases and what their current assignment is. But then again, updating here to say, yep, typically we're actually processing and completing these grievances in just over half a day from a standard or from an expedited priority standpoint. And again, if I need to select more sections of the pie or undo any of those constraints, I can easily do that. So that's a good sense of what our current inventory is, right? You heard me talk about, what's due in the next 72 hours. Those next 3 days can really make or break you, right? So this is where we take that amount of data, we drill down even further and then provide you actionable content. So again, it looks like we have a fair breakdown of assignment for these cases that are due in the next 72 hours. Now, some users or folks may have more cases assigned to them than others, but we can see it's fairly even, and that we're actually trending one under what we see our typical volume at. So again, quick insight into, hey, typically we see about 30 cases on average that are due in the next 72 hours. So no sirens going off, no red flags. But down here below is where we're actually able to update based off of those users. So if I click on Hail here, that largest section of the pie, we're going to see Hail's cases, right? But not only can we gain that information, but we can simply double click on those and open them up. So both from a management perspective, but also a user of the solution, this is where I can come to get my work and drill right into those cases and perform those necessary actions. Now, I don't want to spend the entire time on dashboards, but one more I want to make sure that I'm highlighting is taking advantage of some of that data that may not be housed locally, right? So Eric brought up integrations a lot and how we're seeing more and more folks using Salesforce to house their member and provider data, right? So when we think about grievances and providing insight into our organization, we're combining grievance data along with provider and member data right here. So the example that Eric kind of used that goes beyond different areas within the organization is quality of care, right? So that has definite insight and related items to provider credentialing, provider contracting. So if we were to take a look at quality of care cases here and that section of the pie, we can start to see if we're trending during certain times of the year or if we have an uptick in those quality of care cases. But the other thing that happened was we've updated now those grievances by certain providers. So if we want to perform some root cause analysis with some of our existing providers that are tied to quality of care appeals, and we'll say that, you know, Lorna in here has actually 2 different quality of care appeals, one in February of this year and one in June of this year. So we're updating and constraining that list to see those 2 particular appeals. And again, if I want to open those up and perform some type of root cause analysis, I can really dig in and take a look at the data and the documents tied to that provider and that member in those quality of care grievances. And we can also see that there are 2 other. And again, if we ever need to back out or unconstrain these, we easily can just by clicking back through those dashboards. So we talked about a lot of data. How are we getting that? How are we generating that? How are we presenting that to the users? Well, when we think about content services, we think about case management and intelligent routing and intaking that information, right? So let's talk about how we're processing those items that we've captured. So again, we have a shorter amount of time today, so I want to make sure I'm getting through as much as possible, but classification, trying to help the users of this solution make easy and quick decisions. So we've received an appeal, for example, and we need to classify this because we need to ensure that we're processing it correctly. We're only going to be presenting the users the appropriate questions and the appropriate fields for them to fill out and capture when necessary. And what does that ultimately lead to? It leads to a richer integration and a richer processing and prediction of those particular, what we'll say, cases or scenarios. And this is a great example right here, because we know that in a certain scenario, in the case that an appeal is submitted by a representative for a member, we're going to need what's called an AOR document, and that stands for Appointment of Representation. So we can either have that already, and this is an excellent point of, you know, Eric mentioned utilizing data and documents across departments. If this was requested for some other reason, we may have it on file and we'll know, so we don't have to go and request a new appointment of representation. But what's even more important here is that because this was submitted by a representative, the system will know automatically that, hey, we need to look for this AOR document, and if we don't have it on file, we need to notify that member they need to complete it. So I'm going to bounce around a little bit here between those sections that Eric mentioned, but we talk about integration, whether that's with your line of business system or whether that's with a productivity tool like Microsoft Word, for example. We're going to be generating that AOR document right here and displaying it in Word format so that it's editable to an extent before we accept that content. The other thing I want to bring up when we talk about content services and case management and intelligent routing is that we did not choose what type of letter to generate, right? We clicked a button that said generate letter. And what we're trying to get across here is these solutions are doing a lot of the thinking and decision making for you, because I don't want to have to choose what type of letter to generate. I don't want to have to choose, well, what type of header if I'm in a large organization, particularly one that has multiple lines of business and multiple plans, right? We want the system to make those easy decisions for you. so that the user can focus on what is next, what's the next required activity that I need to complete. And again, we talk about capture. So when we're generating this document, yeah, there's an integration here into Microsoft Word, but we're instantly uploading this to the solution so that other departments can utilize this if necessary. But then even more so, if we're getting that member to fill out this document and send it back in, we're taking advantage of this barcode here and automatically classifying it so a user doesn't have to even use a keyboard when we think about capturing that data and automating the routing of this document. I'll go ahead and hit accept here. And again, when you think about capture, importing that AOR document right into the solution immediately. And I haven't had to use my keyboard at all. Because of the data and all those integration points, we know the data that should be on that document, and it's automatically appeared right here in my member documents for who that appeal is for. So let's take a look at another way that we're generating those documents. So we can imagine that within this particular appeal, we've decided that we're gonna uphold our original decision. And for everyone that knows, for those Part C cases, we need to create a level 2 case, a case that's going to the IRE or the independent review entity, right? So how are we relating that data between the two cases? Well, again, because we have we're using OnBase as our content services platform, it's a lot about relationships between what we'll say cases or objects. So again, from that level 1 case, based off of actions that were performed on it, the system is going to know what needs to happen next, and it automatically created that level 2 case. You can tell that by that yellow header up here, and related it back down. This is incredibly important when we talk about some of that auditing and regulatory reporting, and that we're tying them back together. And I'll touch on that more in a second, but I wanted to show another kind of flavor of generating and capturing those documents and content. So we know for a level 2 case, we always need to create what's called an IRE packet. And that consists of documents from our earlier case, any documents we've generated, any documents we've received during the processing of that case. And this is just another great tool within the solution that says, hey, we always want to capture and create these types of documents. So as opposed to, the old days where I'm opening up, something like an Adobe Acrobat and pulling in documents from 5 different systems and from my desktop and from this file share, this solution is capturing all of those for you automatically, and then providing the ability to rearrange pages within each one of those documents, rearrange the order of these particular documents, and combine them into a single document without changing or compromising the integrity of those original documents. And again, I can preview the way that will look like. I can add additional, and through the click of essentially 2 buttons, I've managed to put together 5 documents automatically and be able to automatically send off or upload that to a portal.
And the only thing I'll jump in here as this is running and John moves on to the next piece is that obviously the components that John's showing here are tied to appeals and grievances, right? But the concepts that John are showing are very translatable across a health organization, right? Think of it here as a case that's being generated, but then that case, as John said, with the IRE or with the level 2 case, there are several instances, right, where I've got a primary case with sub cases that need to be generated and manage multiple interconnected work streams, right? So the platform has the ability to manage those related situations. We obviously showed the letter generation piece at the beginning, which obviously has a number of variable uses. But that case packet piece there that John just generated, a lot of you probably don't know what an IRE case packet is, or maybe not even know what an IRE is, right? But those case packets, think of that across any area in your company where you need to take that collection of documents and then be able to share those documents with other people, whether that's inside or outside of the organization, whether that's people, I mean, we've seen this used with folks on the credentialing side for a cred committee review, where I need to bring together a collection of credentialing applications and their associated information and share that out to a potential remote review board. So start thinking about these use cases that John's showing here for your specific world, right? Because at the end of the day, this platform has the ability to be extended to your specific needs based off of a proven platform.
So let's get back to, I want to keep circling back to reporting. So we went through some of the different dashboards and how we're utilizing data to make decisions and get to my work. This is another kind of view into those dashboards. This time we've put it inside of a case. So this exists for all solutions, right? And when I say case, I'm thinking that could be an appeal, that could be a provider that I'm working on it in a contracting scenario, that could be a survey, right, that I'm using in our outreach product. But what we're going to do is capture every single action that's taking place on that particular case or object and all the different activities that are associated with it. So you saw me before, one of the activities was to generate that appointment of representation document. Well, that's going to be logged here. So from an audit perspective, whether it's a regulatory audit or it's an internal audit on our existing processes, we're storing all of that data for you so that you can be confident that when it comes time for that inevitable audit, we know exactly what has happened on our particular objects that we're working on. So that covers it kind of from an audit perspective. But what about when we talk about regulatory audits? So Eric mentioned that within our universes, we have to provide regulatory reporting yearly, right? Sometimes even quarterly for our quarterly data submissions. In that we're processing these items and we know the appropriate path that we're taking through these content services platforms is we know exactly what data to collect, but also when to collect it. So a good example is that appointment of representation document. Once that was generated, we're actually logging the time that we generated. And when it comes back in, just by saying, hey, we've scanned this barcode, we know what type of document it is, we're logging that data behind the scenes so that a user doesn't have to remember to manually input that information, but also so we can make decisions upon it and then report on it at a later time frame. So when you think about regulatory reporting, we want to make sure that we're removing the user whenever necessary from making those decisions or inputting data, and we're recording that behind the scenes. Now, again, bouncing back to integrations with productivity tools. We know that these need to be submitted in a certain format, in a CSV format. And again, with the click of one button, I'm instantly able to export this out to Excel and simply save this as a comma delimited file if applicable.
And I think that, John brings up one key piece here as we move on to the next component is that these processes that you're managing inside of OnBase, the way by managing both the data, the data and the content, as long as with the business logic of the process, is that your business process becomes content aware, right? And most applications don't have that ability, whether it's a line of business system, whether it's another content platform like this, but I have the ability to see that, okay, because I received this document, I'm capturing that data and I'm triggering other work to take place, right? No other applications that you deal with today are content aware like that, where that because we received this piece of content, I now know that I have to perform this function. So whether, and this is a key point here, whether that we're managing the process in OnBase, where we're being able to leverage those content aware tasks, or that we're going through integration and telling that other system that a task has to be performed because we received a piece of content, right? So that's whether we're managing the process or we're telling another application that they have to do something because we received that information in our system.
Yep, and as far as receiving information in the system, whether we're receiving it or just presenting it, that's another item to think about when we talk about those integration pieces. So it's not uncommon that we're going to have data in multiple sources, right? So if we think about maybe Salesforce for our member data and perhaps our provider data is housed somewhere else. Well, why would we want users to have to log into 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 different systems for that data, right? When we look at a case, we know that a member and a provider are going to be tied to this, right? And this data is not housed within OnBase. It's housed elsewhere, but what we're doing is providing an integration and a lookup into that data so that I can say, hey, let me present this member data and how it's related to the items within our solution right to the end user. And the nice part about this is, let's say that a member puts in a change of address during the process. Well, because we're utilizing those integration points into that given member system, we're always going to have the most up-to-date address so that during the course of an appeal, right, this member moves, and the next letter that is generated, because we're accessing that member system, will instantly have the correct address. Same thing goes for your providers. If they go from non-contract to contracting with you during the course of this, we'll have that information up in front of you. So let's jump between solutions here and look at another integration point as far as not data, but a productivity tool or another application. So what you're seeing here is our network development and contracting solution, and we can see that guiding us through the process, we've made it through a couple different areas. We've already negotiated with this particular provider, and it's a time of almost contract execution. But before I send that up to Docusign, I want to talk about that negotiation point. So within our enterprise file sync and share solution, within ShareBase, what we're doing is we're providing a URL to that provider to review that contract document, right? If there are any changes to that, they can send that back, but within that integration, we can review and check on the track changes and changes to that document so that we can see anywhere where content or data may have been removed from that contract or added. And the great part about it is, even if we don't have those track changes on within OnBase, we'll be able to compare the different revisions and versions of that document. Now, when I say upload to Docusign, again, if you think about automating this solution and making the decisions easy for the users, we're going to have stop gaps. The first one is, do you need to review or reorder this packet in any way, shape, or form? Because for those of you who don't know, Docusign, you pay by the envelope, right? So we don't want to unnecessarily use those if we don't have to. So an intelligent just check to say, do you need to review? I don't need to do that. So I'll hit no, and then it's going to process that, and it's not asking me to enter in any provider information. It's not asking me to say, hey, which document do I want to upload here? We're taking those integration points, that provider information and the documents that we've generated, and we know right out of the gate what we need to attach. And through a direct integration with Docusign, a couple of different things have happened. We've automatically made that available for us to review before we send it out. But then even more importantly, we've gathered, and I don't know if you caught that on the screen here, we've gathered and put this in the correct Docusign template, so we know automatically where that user needs to sign and who needs to sign it. In this case, that provider. And if I scroll down to the bottom here, the nice part about this is that it's actually recognizing that template and putting the required, pardon me, required signature spots in the correct place so that, I can just simply review this as that contract administrator and easily hit send. And now it's out of OnBase. We still have our contract document, but where is this? We have services running that are going to say, hey, when this gets signed, we're going to automatically bring it back into OnBase. And what does it look like for that provider? Well, we have our email here, and it says, hey, please sign this particular document. Let's review it real quickly here. And when I click that link, it's going to take me right into Docusign to review as the provider in this case. So I'll hit continue, I'll hit OK, I'll hit start. It'll take me right to where I need to sign on this document. And I'll use my saved one here, and then I'll click finish. Now, the great part is whether or not you're executing these internally with a wet signature or with Docusign as well, it's going to know and have that intelligent routing built into our process. So it's going to send it to whoever needs to sign this internally next. And again, those services are running behind the scenes so that once it is executed and the next step needs to happen, most likely going to be that provider onboarding. It's going to run that through for you automatically. So we're not constantly going back to check our work here. And the last thing I want to touch on before ending today is our work. Again, we think about what I need to do, and Eric mentioned personalization earlier. I want to be able to come to one place to get my work. And we can see up here, within appeals and grievances, we have my cases. Well, let's go back to those dashboards real quickly. We think about a dashboard as bringing in data from multiple different sources. And those sources could even be applications that you're using today within OnBase, right? So if I look at activities, again, this is more of a management dashboard letting me know, hey, based off of my team, where is all the work? But I can single this down and constrain it into an individual user, and that's where Bogart comes to get his work, right? And the great part about it is that I can consolidate and bring in my work across different departments if necessary. And again, just like before, be able to click on an item and work that particular case. Or, if we see these as more lower value activities maybe just acknowledgements. I have a bucket full of acknowledgements I need to perform. I can choose to work based off of my activity that are related to those cases as well. And this is also the place where a manager would come to reallocate cases or workload based off of folks maybe being out of the office or employee turnover or just buckets becoming out of balance. So just to recap here, I want to make sure we're touching on all the different areas that we covered. So a big one was reporting. So insights into your data, your process, your team. More reporting on the regulatory side. So anytime we're needing to deliver data in a specific format to a regulatory agency and being able to capture the right amount of data or the correct data at the correct time behind the scenes, so users aren't forced to input data, but then also from an audit perspective. Again, whether or not we're auditing individual users of the solution or our process or those cases and objects within our solution. We also showed document generation, so generating a letter and automatically choosing the correct template, but choosing and presenting the correct data, whether it's in a number of different systems on that particular document, but then also grabbing a large subset of documents and combining them for, in this case, it was an IRE packet, but it could very well be a contract packet or an onboarding packet as well. And then integrations, so data integrations into your different line of business systems, into productivity tools like Microsoft Word or Excel, or what you didn't see here today was Outlook. So being able to just simply upload an email or an attachment directly into OnBase, directly from Outlook. And then also purpose-built integration. So we saw that integration within with Docusign, where we're instantly able to upload a contract into Docusign, make sure and review that our signature locations are in the correct places and send that off to the appropriate provider, but then also bring that contract back in once it is signed. And then overall case management and content services. So being as predictive as possible and knowing, based off of capturing input and analyzing data, the appropriate path to send these objects and cases down, and make sure that we're performing the appropriate activities and required items on them, as well as, you know, small little heads up, just like we saw within the contracting solution, says, hey, before you do this, do you need to review? Just little logical steps like that that can really make a difference and enhance the processing and interaction with these different objects.
Well, John, I think that was a great way to take a lot of the information we talked about earlier, give everyone a taste of what content services can do for their organization, and some good use cases, and being able to see some of the things we're talking about in action. You know, from a timing perspective today, we're gonna wrap up at this point. But if people do have questions, feel free to reach back out to the team here at CuraWorks. You can reach out to us by going to the website at www.curaworks.com, KIRIWORKS, and either do more research on our products, or again, feel free to reach out through our contact form to learn more. I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar, and thank you for your time and focus, and look forward to talking to you further. Have a great rest of your Thursday.